Elias Price was 39 years old, a civil engineer who spent his days reading load tolerances, soil reports, and the long-term consequences of decisions made in the ground. He drove a truck he'd bought used 3 years before. He carried a brown leather work bag that was the right size for what he needed, and had been for a long time. On a Wednesday morning in early November, he sat in the offices of the Hargrove & Cole estate firm in Macon, Georgia, and listened to a lawyer read his grandfather's will. The room had 11 people in it. Solomon Price had known all of them. Elias was the only one Solomon had called every Sunday morning for 7 years, without missing one. When the lawyer read the line about the dollar, Vivian laughed. It wasn't loud. It was the kind of sound a person makes when something confirms what they already believed. She reached for her phone before the sentence was finished. The sentence was not finished. The lawyer did not pause. He turned the page and continued reading. What he read next would take everything Vivian thought she understood about her marriage and remove the ground from under it. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The coffee at Hargrove & Cole was from a machine in the hallway. Elias had declined it. He'd brought his thermos, the same one he brought to every job site, filled at home at 5:53 in the morning, the same time he always did it. Elias Price had spent 15 years doing the work that held things up. Bridges, water treatment infrastructure, municipal road systems engineered to last 40 years under the weight of people who would never know his name. It was the kind of work that didn't photograph well, but that entire communities depended on without knowing they did. He was the kind of engineer who read the full specification document before signing off on anything, who noticed the detail on page 7 that changed the interpretation of everything before it. He had learned that habit from his grandfather. Solomon Price had been 84 years old when he died on the 23rd of October in the farmhouse outside Macon, where he had lived for 50 years. He drove an old Ford F-100 pickup until 2 years before the end. He wore work boots to Sunday service. He ate at the same diner every Thursday and tipped the same waitress 40% for 11 straight years because she remembered his order and his name. His house was modest. His life was quiet, and nearly everyone outside a small circle of legal and financial advisors had no idea what he'd spent his adult life building. Elias had known the man. He had not known the complete scope of what Solomon had built. His grandfather had told him once, on a Sunday call 4 years ago, "You'll understand the full picture when the time comes. The important thing is you already know the part that matters." Elias had held on to that without fully knowing what it meant. He would understand it on a Wednesday morning, in a room full of people who had not been paying the same kind of attention. The conference room at Hargrove & Cole smelled of wood polish and old paper. Long table, 12 chairs, morning light coming through windows that looked out over a parking lot. Hargrove himself, 72, compact, silver at the temples. A man who had delivered difficult information in orderly fashion for 4 decades, sat at the head of the table with a bound document in front of him. Vivian had dressed for the occasion. A dark blazer, the pearl earrings she wore for what she called significant events. She had said almost nothing during the 2-hour drive from Atlanta. That silence had its own shape. Hargrove read through the document in order. The first section covered personal items. The Ford pickup to Elias's uncle Marcus. The workshop tools to his cousin Dwayne. A set of first edition volumes to a lifelong friend in Augusta. Each item was read plainly, received without comment. The second section began with Solomon's grandchildren. Hargrove's voice did not change when he read Elias's name. "To my grandson Elias Michael Price, I leave the dollar bill dated 1959 that has been in the right-hand drawer of my desk at the Macon property for 62 years. That was when Vivian made her sound, a brief exhale, something compressed into the shape of a laugh. Her hand went to her phone. The phone came out of her bag and rested on the table, face up, before the sentence was done. Elias looked at her hand on the phone. He looked at it the way he looked at a measurement that needed to be logged. He filed it away. Hargrove did not pause, and the following primary trust instrument, effective immediately upon my death. He turned the page. He adjusted his reading glasses. He continued in the same unhurried voice. The Price Family Land Trust, established March 1971, amended most recently in September of this year. He read the trust summary as he had read everything else, without emphasis, without dramatics, as if the numbers were the same weight as everything before them. 14,200 acres of rural Georgia land with active timber and mineral rights leases currently producing annual revenue. 4 commercial properties in Atlanta, Savannah, Augusta, and Columbus, each held in the trust, each cash flowing. Equity positions in 2 regional banks. A liquid portfolio. An independent appraisal commissioned in August of that year. Total estimated trust value, $114 million. Sole beneficiary, Elias Michael Price. The room did not make a sound for a long moment. Vivian's phone was still on the table, face up, untouched since she'd put it there. She was very still in the way of a person whose understanding of the room has just been fundamentally restructured. She turned toward Elias. She put her hand on his arm. He looked at her hand on his arm. He looked at it the same way he'd looked at it 60 seconds before. He didn't say anything. He picked up his thermos. He picked up his leather bag. He stood and shook Hargrove's hand. He walked out. In the hallway, Hargrove's associate handed him a small envelope. Inside it, in a clear plastic sleeve, was a dollar bill dated 1959. He knew what it was. Solomon had told him about it 4 years ago on a Sunday call, the first dollar he'd ever earned, doing fence work on a neighbor's farm in the summer of 1959, when he was 17 years old. He had kept it since then. He put the envelope in the inside pocket of his jacket. He would call Daphne Okafor in the morning. The year before Solomon died, Elias had driven down to Macon 7 times. Not for any particular reason that he could point to. Because the man was 83 and the visits mattered, and Elias was the kind of person who showed up for things before they became urgent. He had spent 2 of those visits repairing the farmhouse's crawlspace drainage, a problem that had been developing for years, that he diagnosed on his 3rd visit, corrected on his 4th, and came back to verify on his 5th. He did the work himself across 2 Saturdays. Solomon had sat in a lawn chair in the yard and asked questions about what Elias was doing and why, with the attentiveness of a man who was never too old to want to understand how something worked. Vivian had not come to Macon in 4 years. She had her interior staging business, her clients, her calendar. He hadn't pressed it. That was what he did, extended patience without requiring explanation, filled the gaps quietly, and told himself the distance was circumstantial. He had noticed the shift in her the previous spring, the way her schedule acquired texture he wasn't given access to, late creative meetings, networking dinners described only in broad terms, a name, Raymond Colby, that started appearing in her professional vocabulary with a frequency that didn't match its stated significance. He had told himself she was building something. He respected that. He had always been the kind of man who gave people the room they asked for, because he believed in people's capacity to build things. He had extended the benefit of the doubt the way he extended it on an engineering assessment, based on history, continued until the evidence indicated otherwise. A senior colleague named Gerald Ekiampong, 25 years at the firm, The kind of engineer whose approval on a set of drawings meant something, had said something to Elias once. About 2 years before, he had looked at him across the conference table and said, "You read the full spec before you sign. That's rarer than it should be." He'd paused. Apply that to everything. Elias hadn't known exactly what Gerald meant at the time. That was what Vivian had never understood. Until the morning Miriam Cole called him the day after the will reading and said she needed to show him some records before he made any decisions about anything. Miriam Cole was 66 years old, and she had been Solomon Price's estate attorney for 30 years, working alongside Hargrove as the trust's senior legal counsel. She was small and straight-backed, silver hair pinned precisely, gold reading glasses worn on a thin chain around her neck. She had the particular stillness of someone who had learned a long time ago that most situations resolve themselves correctly if you let them proceed in the right order. She called Elias at 7:08, the morning after the will reading. Her voice was even. "I need to show you something," she said. "Come this morning if you can. Eat before you come." He arrived at Hargrove & Cole at 9:15. She was already at the small conference table in her office with 2 cups of coffee poured and a thick accordion file in front of her. She waited until he sat. She looked at him over her reading glasses. "I'm going to tell you what I saw," she said, "and then I'm going to show you what I kept. I need you to let me get through all of it before you say anything." He said nothing. He let her begin. The first section she opened was a set of records she had compiled while preparing the trust's required asset disclosures, a process that had begun 8 months earlier and that required a complete inventory of Elias's marital financial position to establish the trust's protected legal status. In the course of that inventory, she had identified an anomaly in the joint home equity line of credit on the Atlanta property. 3 weeks before Solomon's death, $67,500 had been transferred from the joint home equity account to a Georgia LLC. Miriam placed the LLC registration on the table. She placed it precisely, the way she placed everything. Manager of record, Vivian C. Price. Co-member, Raymond Colby. Elias looked at the name. He had heard Raymond Colby mentioned professionally across the past 18 months, a commercial developer Vivian had been staging properties for. He looked at the date the LLC was registered. He looked at the date of the transfer. He looked at the date of Solomon's death. He picked up his coffee. He set it back down. "She transferred the money 3 weeks before your grandfather died," Miriam said. Before the reading. Before she had any knowledge of what the trust contained. He understood what that meant. The transfer had not been motivated by the inheritance. She had already decided, had been deciding for months, to leave a man she believed had limited prospects. She had taken the money before there was any other number in the room to consider. The inheritance had nothing to do with it. That was the part that completed the picture. "There's more," Miriam said. She opened the second section. Raymond Colby's development firm had been operating at a significant deficit for 14 months. 3 commercial projects behind schedule, carrying the specific financial weight of projects that had been started on projections that didn't hold. Colby had recently brought in 2 new capital contributors. One of them, per the LC operating agreement Miriam had obtained through the trust's legal discovery process, was Vivian Price. The $67,500 was her initial contribution. Her stake in a company that was actively. Elias stood from the table. He walked to Miriam's window. The Macon morning. A parking lot. A low November sky. He thought about something his grandfather had said to him once about the land, specifically about what made a parcel worth acquiring. "You learn to read the ground," Solomon had told him. "Not what it looks like on the surface, what it's sitting on, what it can hold. Anything built on it comes after that." He had been talking about soil and mineral composition and timber yield potential. He had also been talking about other things. Vivian had looked at the surface for 9 years. She had not read the ground. He turned back. He stood over everything the way he stood over a full set of engineering documents before a site evaluation. Not reading any individual sheet, but looking at all of it together, feeling for where the lines connected and where they didn't. The transfer records, the LLC registration, the Colby Partnership Agreement, the timeline. Every piece ran into the next. He could see the whole shape of it. "What do you want to do?" Miriam asked. "I want to call Daphne," he said. Miriam said nothing. She refilled his coffee. He didn't move fast. That was the part she had never been able to account for. Daphne Okafor had been a family and civil litigation attorney for 14 years. She was methodical in the specific way of someone who understood that the preparation phase was the only place where outcomes were actually determined. That everything in a conference room was simply what the preparation had made inevitable. She had the civil fraud filing in motion within 48 hours of their first meeting. She also brought in a financial forensics specialist named Tobias Grant, who spent 8 days with a complete transaction history for every joint account going back 3 years. What Grant found beyond the $67,500 transfer was an additional $18,900 in incremental withdrawals over the previous 11 months. Household account disbursements logged as business expenses that had no corresponding receipts and that traced, on closer review, to the same Colby LLC. Total undisclosed movement from joint accounts, $86,400. Elias received Grant's complete summary on a Tuesday. He read it in his truck in the parking lot of a job site during his lunch break. He folded it in half and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. He went back to his 1 o'clock site walk. Vivian called him in late November. Her voice had the careful warmth of someone who had been advised to maintain a cooperative tone. "I think we should try to handle this directly," she said. "I don't think it has to get complicated." "All right," Elias said. A pause. She had expected more from his side of the silence. "I've been working with an attorney," she said. "I think the process can be very straightforward, given where we stand with the joint assets." "I agree," Elias said. She said she hoped he was doing all right. She said she knew it had been a difficult month. She said she hoped they could both move forward without things becoming adversarial. He said he appreciated that. He ended the call. Miriam was sitting across from him at the table in Daphne's office. She had been quiet through the whole call. She looked at him. "She's working from the wrong number," Elias said. Miriam said nothing. She refilled his coffee. He thought about the engineer. A structural miscalculation doesn't announce itself when the load is light. The system holds. It appears stable. The error only becomes visible when the load reaches its actual value, when the bridge is full, when the pressure is real, when the ground beneath the foundation is asked to bear what it was actually designed to carry. That was when the calculation either held or it didn't. Vivian had built her entire exit plan on a load calculation that was wrong at the base. She had done the math on a version of the situation that was missing the most significant number. She had just never thought to check whether the sentence was finished before she formed her conclusion. Daphne filed the response to her attorney's preliminary settlement inquiry. She called Elias at 7:11 a.m. to confirm it was in. "Her attorney is working from the token bequest," Daphne said. "He thinks the inheritance is $1. "I know," Elias said. "He's going to walk into that room with a settlement figure and believe it completely." "I know," Elias said. Elias arrived at the conference room on Peachtree Road 16 minutes early. He liked it that way. The room was on the 9th floor of a building whose structural specs he had actually reviewed 4 years prior on a municipal contract. He knew the load distribution on this floor, the beam spacing, the quality of the poured foundation. He thought about this briefly. Then he sat down and opened his notebook. The space itself was neutral. Long table, nothing on it yet. A window showing the gray December sky over Atlanta. The quiet of a room waiting to be used for something consequential. Daphne arrived at 9:44. Tobias Grant arranged his annotated forensic file with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood exactly what his numbers would do to the room. Miriam Cole arrived at 9:52, straight-backed, gold reading glasses on their chain. A second accordion file under her arm. She sat beside Daphne and did not speak. Vivian's attorney, a man named Prescott, family law practice in Buckhead, arrived at 10:01 with Vivian, and a second attorney brought in for the financial portion of the proceedings. They entered the way people enter when they believe the shape of what's about to happen has already been decided. Prescott had a folder. His second attorney had a brief. Vivian was composed. She had prepared herself carefully. She glanced at Elias once when she came through the door. A brief professional assessment. Then she looked toward Daphne as if Elias were simply another presence in the room. Prescott opened with the proposed settlement framework. He outlined the marital estate as his firm had assessed it, the Atlanta property, the joint accounts, the retirement balances. He addressed the inheritance specifically. He noted the estate bequest of record was a $1, known dollar's symbolic token, not a divisible marital asset, and he set that aside from the calculations. His projected settlement figure was based on the visible marital estate. He delivered it with the calm confidence of a man who had done his homework and trusted his numbers. Daphne thanked him. She let everything sit in the room for exactly the right amount of time. Then she opened her folder. The first document she placed on the table was the Price Family Land Trust Summary, the August independent appraisal, the full asset schedule, 14,200 acres with active mineral and timber leases, 4 commercial properties, 2 regional bank equity positions, liquid assets, the appraised value of Elias's sole beneficiary position, $114 million. She set it in front of Prescott and let him read it. He looked at it. He looked at it again. His expression did not change immediately, and then it did, in the specific way of a man who has just found the number his calculation was missing. The dollar bequest your client heard at the November 6th reading, Daphne said, was a personal item, a physical artifact with sentimental value. The trust was the primary instrument, read immediately following. Her voice was factual and level. We understood there may have been some uncertainty in the room about what was being read. Something moved across Vivian's face. Not just the financial recalibration, something underneath it. A specific recognition, arriving in sequence, of what the moment in the conference room in Macon now looked like from where she was sitting. She had reached for her phone before the sentence was finished. That action, and its timing, and everything it had revealed about what she had already decided, all of it was now in the room with her in a way she could not. Tobias Grant placed the second document, the fraud summary. Daphne walked through it in the same level voice. The $67,500 transfer, the 11 months of incremental withdrawals, the LC, the Colby Co. membership, the total $86,400 in undisclosed movement from joint accounts. A civil fraud action has been filed and is in the discovery phase, Daphne said. We are placing this documentation before all parties today, so everyone in this room is working from a complete and accurate picture. Prescott's second attorney was writing quickly. Prescott himself had put down his pen. He was looking at Daphne with the expression of a man who has just understood that the meeting he prepared for was not the meeting he was in. The silence in the room lasted 9 seconds. Elias counted them. "We'll give your team a moment to review," Daphne said. Elias stood. He buttoned his jacket. He shook Tobias Grant's hand. He shook Miriam's hand. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned back. Vivian was looking at him. He said it quietly, the way he said most things, only for her. He spent 52 years making sure the right person was in that room, Elias said. You helped improve it. He walked out without looking back. It did not happen all at once. The civil fraud settlement was reached in March. The recovery totaled $79,000, the documented amounts minus legal costs, and what had already been absorbed by losses in Colby's development. Raymond Colby's firm filed for voluntary restructuring in February. 2 of his 3 stalled projects were acquired at a loss by competing developers. The Lelsa Vivian had co-registered dissolved quietly in the spring. Prescott restructured the divorce settlement terms 4 times before the final agreement was signed. The Atlanta property was liquidated and the equity divided per the fraud recovery order. The joint accounts were settled. The trust was not a marital asset and was not subject to division. The court was not asked to consider it as one. Vivian had spent a year building a careful exit from a life she had decided was not sufficient. The plan had been prepared with precision and executed with patience, and it had been built on a reading of the situation that was wrong at the one level that changed all the others. She was carrying the weight of the life her choices had constructed, the way a person carries something they cannot put down. Not loudly, just constantly, and in a smaller space than the one she... Elias was building something, not fast, the way he built everything. By spring, he had retained a trust management firm in Atlanta and was moving through the first phase of the Land Trust's active development plan, a timber rights renegotiation that his advisors projected would increase annual revenue from that section alone by 1 million. He had walked all 14,200 acres twice, in 2 separate seasons, the way he walked every job site before he signed off on anything. He knew the soil composition of the sections that mattered. He intended to understand every acre the way he understood every structural system he had ever put his name on. He answered every call the same day. He gave accurate timelines, and he hit them. The dollar bill dated 1959 was in a small frame on the windowsill of his home office, beside the engineering drawings he was most proud of. The bridge in Gwinnett County that had come in 4 months early. The water treatment system in Carroll County that his crew had done correctly the first time. He looked at the dollar bill sometimes without thinking much about it. It was the first thing. The rest had followed it because Solomon had not stopped after that one. On an April morning, Elias stood at the edge of a timber section on the northeast corner of the Price land, 400 acres of longleaf pine that Solomon had planted 60 years ago and never harvested because he said the time was not right yet. The air was cold and clean, the smell of pine resin and turned earth and something older underneath it, something in the mineral composition of the soil itself. The morning light was low and specific, the kind of light Georgia has in the spring before the heat has settled in for the season. He stood there with his thermos and his leather bag and his work boots and the quiet of 14,000 acres around him. He thought about a man who had sat in a lawyer's office on a Wednesday morning in November and watched a room find out exactly what they had been wrong about. He thought about that man the way you think about a version of yourself that isn't far behind you, with recognition, without grief. He put on his hard hat. His name was above the company mark on the front of it. He walked toward the work. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.